Welcome to today's online class. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most contemporary poets whose name is Thomas King, and I'll talk about his early education, I'll talk about his early life, and we'll discuss one of his important poems. Okay, so let me begin with giving description about his early childhood experiences and also his literary works. Thomas King is considered to be a major figure in contemporary native Canadian writing, and he uses the letters CC after his name. CC is kind of honorary degree, you can say, okay, which is known as the Order of Canada. Okay, so this is Order of Canada, and it is a Canadian national order, and the second highest honor, in fact, for merit in the system of orders, decorations, and medals of Canada after the Order of Merit. So there are, two highest honors which are, conferred upon people. And the first, the highest order of honor is obviously the Order of Merit, and the second highest is the Order of Canada. And it is Thomas King who has been, recognized with this second highest honor, being the Order of Canada. Okay, that is why he uses the word, the letter CC, Thomas King CC. When you look at his, his whole early childhood, he was born in 1943, and he is obviously, undoubtedly, a Canadian writer. And apart from becoming a writer, he is also considered to be one of the broadcast presenters, who often, mostly writes, about First Nations. Okay, and as I told you, he is an important figure in contemporary native Canadian writings. So he's the one, who is well known for writing about First Nations. Thomas King was born in, Roseville. Okay, Roseville is a place in California, and he was born, as I told you, way back in 1943. That was April 24th, April 1943. And he claims to have German as well as Greek descent from his mother's side, and Cherokee descent from his father's side. So he's having those origins. Both descent. German, Greek, and also Cherokee, descent from his father. And there is a well-known book which has been, you can say, edited also, which is entitled "The Truth About Stories: A Native Narrative," which is in fact written by King Thomas, Thomas, and it was published 2003. And it is in this book that Thomas King narrates so many important, his memoirs of his life in his book, and particularly he tells us about his own life, about his father, about his mother, about his other literary works also. And it is in this book, which is entitled "The Truth About Stories: A Native Narrative," he says that his father left the family when the boys were very young, and also that they were raised almost entirely by their mother. So not by father, but by mother, because his father left the family much before, when the boys were very young, And in his another series of massive lectures, okay, which is published in the form of a book, which is entitled "The Truth About Stories," and that was published in 2003. Again, it is in this book again that Thomas King tells that the fathers, tells about his father's death, and so on. Tells that after their father's death, he and his brother learned that their father had two other families, okay, and neither of whom knew about the third family also, which he was having. So by this you can well understand what kind of, you can say, rearing up he had, what kind of upbringing he had. I think he lacked, and he was deprived of fatherly love, because his father had three families, I think, of which even his father's other two families also did not know. So he probably was attached to the third family, Thomas King. And as a child, Thomas King, attended grammar school, which was in Roswell, where he was born, California, and also two schools. I mean, both private schools were there, private Catholic and also public high schools he attended when you talk about his early education. And after flunking out of Sacramento State University, where he completed his education, he joined the Navy, obviously the U.S. Navy, okay, for a very brief period of time before receiving a medical discharge for a knee injury. So he had a knee injury, and because of which he had to forcibly leave U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, and he had to leave that. And following this incident, he worked worked with several jobs, including as in like an ambulance driver. Also, he worked also as a bank teller, a photojournalist in New Zealand, for 3 years, So I mean, his knee injury also, has another story to tell us about his life, and obviously that life was struggling life he had to undergo through. So he had a very struggling life, and eventually, after completing his bachelor's and also master's degrees from Chico State University in California, he moved to a place called Utah, where he worked as a counselor for American Indian students before completing his PhD, PhD program. He completed his PhD in English discipline, from the University of Utah, and his MA thesis was on film studies. That's very interesting, I mean, because he was fascinated by film industry, and that's how he went into doing that, writing his thesis on film studies, particularly MA thesis, and his PhD thesis was on Native American studies. And at that time, we had very rare people, very less people working in this area, Native American field, and he was the one who showed his interest, he displayed an interest, in doing research in this field of Native American studies. And one of the earliest works, to explore the oral storytelling and tradition as literature was obviously his PhD dissertation, which was obviously on Native American studies. So that's very interesting, and that's how he was fascinated towards, Native American studies, and he started writing about First Nations. Having done a very profound research in this area, he went to doing research, in this area of First Nations, and it was around this time that Thomas King became very much interested in American Indian oral traditions, and which also involved storytelling. So he was, too much fascinated by this oral tradition, traditional stories, and he developed story writing also. And once he achieved his ambition of writing, becoming a writer, he left his reservation, in 1980, because he thought that he could manage, he could come to the mainstream. Therefore, he left the reservation in 1980. And after moving to Canada, that was in 1980, he started teaching, and he started teaching native studies, because that was his expertise area, he started teaching native studies at the University of Lethbridge, which is in Alberta, in the early 1980s. It is said that he also served as a faculty member of the University of Minnesota's American Indian Studies Department, and obviously, if you look at his present position, he is currently an English professor at the University of Guelph, which is Ontario, and he lives in Guelph. And he's said to have been teaching, I think, creative writing there, okay, in that university. It is also believed that Thomas King was chosen to deliver the 2003 Massey lecture series, which is entitled, which has in fact been published into a book, which has been developed into a book, which is entitled "The Truth About Stories: A Native Narrative," which I already talked about, published in 2003. And he was the first Massey lecturer, of self-identifying, Aboriginal descent. So as I told you, I mean, during that time, early period of his education, we had very less people. Very rarely we had Aboriginal people, having been highly educated, and he happens to be one of those lucky people who became the first Massey lecturer of self-identifying as Aboriginal descent. Thomas King is also believed to have explored the native experience in oral stories. As I told you, he was very much fascinated towards orality, oral literature, storytelling. So he started exploring this field, particularly in this the native experience, in oral stories, literature. And he's also started, doing, a little research in other disciplines also, such as like history, religion and politics, popular culture, social protest, in order to make a sense of Northern America's, relationship with Aboriginal people. So because he did not want himself to be detached from this Aboriginal community. Being a part of that community, So he started doing a lot of research, in that community, for that community, and he started teaching native studies as well, Now let me talk about his literary works also, and when we talk about his literary works, Thomas King has been writing novels, and no doubt, obviously, he was a poet as well. He's been writing children's books and collection of stories, since 1980s, And his notable works include A Coyote Columbus Story and A Green Grass Running Water, which was published in 1993. Both of these collection of stories, one is Coyote Columbus Story and the other one, The Green Grass Running Water. Both of these, were nominated for Governor General's Award. It's kind of an honor, as I told you earlier also, okay? And the former for children's literature and the latter for fiction. So A Coyote Columbus Story was famous for children's literature, and also the other book, which is Green Grass and Running Water, that was famous as a fiction, And another book, which was entitled The Inconvenient Indian, A Curious Account of Native People in North America, which was published in 2012, won him, King, the 2014 RBC Taylor Prize. So, this was also equally important. This was also very, very important. So he had several books, which really won him a lot of honors, lots of prestige, in the society. And it was in the 1990s when he served, as story editor for Four Directions, which is considered to be a CBC television drama anthology, anthology series, in fact, which was about First Nations, which was also, held up by production and scheduling delays before finally, airing it in 1996, So, having researched in this field of First Nations, he was invited to serve as a story editor for Four Directions, particularly because he was having that expertise in these native nations, And moreover, he also wrote the teleplay, which was entitled Borders, teleplay Borders, which was also an adaptation of his own previously published short story, for the series. So that was translated into a teleplay, Borders. From 1997 to say 2000, almost for 3 years, Thomas King wrote and also acted in a CBC radio show, and which was entitled, I think, the Dead Dog Cafe Comedy Hour, which featured a fictitious town and fictitious radio program hosted by three First Nations characters, and elements were adopted from his novel. In fact, the novel, which was entitled Green Grass, Running Water. And this broadcast is considered to be, a political and a very social venture, okay, and it is also considered to be a political and social satire with dark humor and also a mocking stereotypes. So he, incorporates the whole, element of irony into his writings also as a satire. He satirizes people later. He satirizes, social ills of the society, with just incorporating dark humor and also mocking at stereotypes. So it was in July 2007 that Thomas King made his, film debut. In fact, his directorial debut, I would say. Okay, and for a short film which was entitled "I'm Not the Indian You Had in Mind." Okay, that was the name of that short film. Okay, which he himself wrote. So which he directed also. And in 2020, his book, which was entitled "The Inconvenient Indian," was adapted by Michel Latimer as a documentary film, okay, which was entitled "Inconvenient Indian." So that was removed and it was kept as "Inconvenient Indian." Okay. So apart from dedicating his life into writings, he also developed certain, you can say, interest towards films also. Okay, he himself acted also, as I told you, and several of his books also have been, transformed into films, short films also. Now, let me talk a little bit about his style. As far as his writing style is concerned, Thomas King's writing style incorporates oral storytelling structures with, a traditional Western narrative. So, as you know, I've already talked about how he was fascinated towards oral literature, and the fact that he was fascinated towards oral literature is getting reflected in his writings also through the style, and style obviously incorporates oral storytelling structures. And moreover, he writes in a very conversational tone. So when you go through his writings, you'll find as if everything has been written in a very informal manner. Characters talking to each other, in a very conversational tone. For example, in the novel Green Grass and Running Water, the narrator argues with some of the characters, and he argues in such a manner as if he's simply talking to them. He's having informal conversation with them, he's chatting with them, so you don't feel like having read novel. So you are reading as if two persons are talking to each other. It's written in a very conversational tone. That's another thing. So in the last book I've seen, which is entitled "The Truth About Stories," which is published 2003, Thomas King is addressing the readers as if in a conversation with responses. So when you go through this book, you find as if he is just answering all the questions which have been asked in an interview. So it's written as if it's been written, you feel as if it has been written into interview form, and he's narrating his beautiful, beautiful events of his own life in this "The Truth About Stories," and we get to know about him through this book, "The Truth About Stories." Furthermore, Thomas King also makes use of a variety of anecdotes when you talk about his style. So apart from incorporating storytelling, orality, oral literature, and conversational tone, he also incorporates a variety of anecdotes and humorous narratives. That's really very interesting, and it is these techniques of making use of like anecdotes and also humorous narratives which really make his writings very interesting, and also fascinating. So readers feel like reading those books, also, he maintains a serious message, in such a way that, which has been compared to the style of like trickster legends in Native American culture. So he is very, very, I would say meticulous about, his way of writing, there's no doubt about that. And when you go through this story, okay, so within this story, what happens is that, King, he is integrating the recently popularized idea of turtles. Okay, all of you must have, read the stories about turtles, and he is exploiting, that idea of narrating the stories about turtles. He's popularizing those and popularizing the idea of turtles all the way down in an anecdote, introducing, in fact, this narrative and calling into the relevancy of this ideology in the Native American history. Yeah, so he is making use of the turtle story, okay, and he's developing that into whole ideology, okay, which is used for American and Native American history. That's one. Now, having talked about his early education and his literary careers, his achievements, let me now talk about the poem which we are concerned with. And the poem today which we are going to discuss is entitled Coyote Sees the Prime Minister, okay, which is written by Thomas King. It's a short film, a short poem, but it's very, very interesting poem. And it happens to be one of Thomas King's most famous poems, okay, one of the most famous poems. It is very short, a pithy poem. It's very simple, but it has profound latent meaning. It is filled with irony, and obviously we see his way of style, writing, getting reflected into this beautiful poem. So let me read this poem for all of you. It reads: Coyote went east to see the Prime Minister. I wouldn't make this up. And the Prime Minister was so happy to see Coyote that he made him a member of cabinet. So you can well see here, a few words being highlighted, capitalized. So those capitalized words have been, deliberately written by Thomas King, where he's putting his emphasis, okay. He's thinking there was a person whose name was Coyote, okay, and he became a member of parliament also. So once he went to see the Prime Minister, okay, and I wouldn't make this up, and the Prime Minister was very, very happy to see this person, Coyote, who was coming from his community, to see Coyote, and that he made him a member of cabinets, and Coyote was made a member of cabinet by the Prime Minister. And then he continues, it reads like this: maybe you can help us solve the Indian problem. So this is what the Prime Minister told him, maybe you can help us solve the Indian problem. Sure, says that Coyote. What's the problem? Then he's asking the Prime Minister, what is the problem then? When Edward tells this story, he always laughs and spoils the ending. So at the end, whenever he is being asked this question, he does not answer that question. He laughs, starts laughing, and the ending is spoiled. So this is a very short poem. Let me now explain the meaning of this poem. This poem is one of the most remarkable poems to come from Canada in recent times particularly, and it has got layerings of irony. The irony is very, very devastating also. But first we need to know a little about Coyote, who that person Coyote was. And Coyote was a very trickster figure in Canadian oral literature. and this name has been deliberately kept by Thomas King, and so the whole history of exploitation and also extermination of natives gets telescoped here, because Coyote is representing that Indian community, and what is also attacked here in this poem is the fact that the white tendency to treat everything, everyone or all Indians in terms of solutions, in terms of problems, is getting reflected through this poem. So, though it's a very grim story, whose ending really gets exploited by Elwood's laughing when telling the story. The fact is that the problem has been resolved. Okay, the problem has been solved. So what's the problem? And the poet himself is raising this question, what's the problem? And here, topography is very, very important. Topography means the uses of the words, okay, is very, very important. And when Thomas King wants to put extra emphasis on a word, he capitalizes, as I told you right at the beginning. Either he capitalizes, or italicizes. But here in this poem, he is capitalizing certain words. Okay, so he is putting emphasis on topography. I would say. He's putting emphasis on those words. And if you go into the in-depth understanding of the poem, what you find is the fact that the poem foregrounds a number of things, by capitalizing words like happy, help, what, and love. So these are the words which have been highlighted, okay, and capitalized also. So these typographical device foregrounds, gives sharper edge to the irony deployed by King, and this irony is undoubtedly very strongly reinforced by references to making things up, to telling story, even to spoiling and ending. So this is very, very important message which he wants to convey to us. And moreover, Elwood's laughing, if you read through this poem, and the end, particularly when telling the story, is quite significant. Why? Because that really points to the native's constant awareness, that though things are terrible, they are funny too. So he is juxtaposing two things, on the one hand he is raising a very serious problem, on the other hand he is bringing some comical elements also, he is making it look funny also. So that was the kind of a style which he was engaging with in writing his poems also. So the reference to the spoiled ending particularly in this poem takes a dig at the most, you can say, the way most such stories are expected to end, so because that really gives a kind of a message that, look, the poem has not been taken very seriously, it's ending on an abrupt note, but message is coming very, very clearly. And moreover, what you find is that at the core of Thomas King's poem is Coyote is saying particularly that sure, yes, I will. When Prime Minister is asking him, can you help us? And he says sure. And then he's asking, what's the problem? And in response to the Prime Minister's question, look at his answer. What kind of answer he's giving? He's saying maybe you can help us solve the Indian problem. So here, what is foregrounded is the irony, which is hidden there. It has got latent meaning, and the irony is in maybe, the word maybe, okay, quote unquote maybe, as well as in the approach, which is always like solving or problems of various kinds. And so the problem which has been raised into a question, like, which is what's the problem, in this context really works at many levels. And then there is also the poet's own statement also, which is coming in the form of I wouldn't make this up. He says, I wouldn't make this up. So the whole interposing of the word this, between, or make, and up, is very, very effective move, okay, because it really touches upon the traditional image of natives as those who make things up. And the play on words such as happy or even laughs, really helped by the capitalization, really adds to the richness and even the whole edge of the irony which the poem uses in a structure of remarkable economy and also tautness. There is also, we find, a kind of a meta narrative, couples, okay, which is working here at work, here as also remarkable self-reflexivity about what the poem is narrating. So let me sum up what I have done today. I've talked about Thomas King, his early life, his early education, his literary careers, and I've also talked and discussed his one of the important poems, which is entitled Coyote Sister Prime Minister. So I hope that today's lecture has helped you in understanding Thomas King and his literary works at a greater length. So that's it for today. Thank you so much.